Hello, everyone, and welcome to the October 7th edition of the Gateway API Community Meeting. As always, this meeting is governed by the Kubernetes Code of Conduct, boiling down effectively to be nice to one another, so please do be nice to one another. We're using Zoom, so if you have questions or interjections, please use the raise hand feature in Zoom because that helps us to keep things flowing. This is an open agenda meeting, so on the meeting invite, there is an agenda linked. You are more than welcome to add something to the bottom of today's agenda. If we have time today, we will get to it. If not, we can always park it for the next meeting, but please feel free. I might see some newcomers, so we'll stop for a minute and give people a chance to say hi. So if you're new here, or if you just want to, if you're coming back or whatever, and you want to take a couple seconds to say hi and just talk about like what you're doing with Gateway API and stuff like that, we'd love to hear from you. We'll give a couple minutes for that.
I think I see some new folks. So, well, I see some names of new folks. I guess I'm gonna have to start going back to turn your cameras on. It's so much nicer. Anybody? Anybody new gonna say hi?
Hello. I was actually looking for the raise hand. I haven't been on Zoom in a while, so I couldn't remember how to do it. We've all moved to Teams. Hello, I'm Kira. I'm on Nginx Gateway Fabric team. Normally Sailor joins these calls because he can go to the ones that are in 11 at 11 p.m., whereas I cannot because I am in Cork in Ireland. So thank you for having an EU-friendly time zone. So I'm going to start coming to these ones every second week. I have I have a PR open at the moment that's getting some love, so I appreciate that. And I'm hopefully going to try and contribute a bit more to the SIG.
Roger that.
Excellent.
Welcome.
Welcome.
Thanks for coming. Glad to see that you'll be here on the reg. So welcome in.
That's not Irish, Shane.
No, it's not. Anybody else? If not, we'll get started here in a second. I see people are putting their names down on the agenda. Thank you. We appreciate it.
And anybody who thinks that the new release stuff may have just moved to the bottom of the list, that's because I did just move it to the bottom of the list, since that's
Oh,
one
okay.
that tends to soak up however much time we have left.
Okay. Roger that. We'll get started on the agenda then. So the first one was just something I dropped at the top. This is kind of a go check this out async. We don't necessarily need to talk about it, but 1.4.0 is released after much ado. Thank you for everybody who helped support this release, everybody who did testing, everybody who did development, everything that everybody did. We really appreciate it. So yeah, that's out. And if you have an implementation and you run into any trouble with it, put in an issue, check with us on Slack, let us know. But otherwise, it is there, it is real. Ta-da. And with that, we'll move on to Candace, who wants to talk about TLS mode allowed routes, number 3458. Searching for a Rickroll, no Rickroll. We got a GitHub here.
Please don't start adding Rickrolls to these.
There's a couple in this doc, you know that, right? They do exist in our meeting notes. All right, go ahead, Candace.
So yeah, Ricardo's working on bringing TLS route into standard. Hopefully, maybe in 1.5 if it passes the acceptance test for new features. But I had actually completely missed this memorandum update, and I want to talk about it a little bit. So this TLS mode is, I always consider TLS route as the pass-through route. And this is actually adding edge termination to TLS route. I guess there are use cases for it. I'm getting used to the fact that there might be use cases for that. But I completely missed it that it was added to the memorandum. It doesn't appear in any other gaps except for the one that Ricardo is now working on recently. So wanted to make sure that this was added as extended in the new gap, because it really isn't necessarily something that all implementers have had a chance to implement.
Okay.
Mike's comment about the primary use case being SNI based routing is, I think, very relevant.
Yeah, but what makes it what makes it so that you can't do that with TCP route or HTTP route or gRPC route? Like, why would a user choose to use TLS route over another
If-
route type?
Sure, I would go with TCP route.
Yeah, TCP route to me feels like you want to route based on a port, really, and TLS route would feel like the one to use for I want to route based on SNI because
Yeah, yeah.
um,
Because otherwise, I think you're ending up with a TCP route with an SNI annotation.
but even there, that kind of what does that
Right.
mean, right? I
What does it
mean,
mean?
if you're okay, sorry, let me back up a moment. A certain amount of this is thinking out loud, Candace, because
Mhm.
I missed this chunk of memorandum as well. And so a certain amount of this is me just kind of remembering what happened back in the emissary days and things like that, right? We tended to think about TCP routing pretty much only being able to look at things at layer 4. So if you wanted to route solely based on what was available at layer 4, you would use a TCP route. And if you needed to route on something that was any higher level than that, you could not use a TCP route. They were called different things in emissary, it doesn't matter. So if you want to route based on SNI, you have to be doing things at a higher level than TCP. And that was what led us to separate those two kinds of constructs. Does that, I don't know, does anybody else think that makes sense? Maybe more importantly, does anybody else think I'm smoking crack? Mikey, I think so. Sorry, Mickey, I think I'm smoking crack. Excellent.
Uh, what you said made sense.
So directing traffic based on SNI, I mean, we can do that with HTTP route.
Except that you wouldn't want to do that for non-HTTP traffic.
Right. The main, I think the main implication here is if you were in a situation where you're not trying to do HTTP, but you do have TLS, or rather you do have, standard TLS, and you're doing your routing based on SNI, this is what it's for. Like it's the express purpose of it. And so I guess I don't see having pass through and terminate as a problem. I guess the ask that terminate should be extended because it came in kind of late and stuff like that may be fine. I guess we could talk through it. The implementations that do this, we would just probably want to check in with them and see like, hey, do you all do termination?
Yeah.
Or not? I think that would be the function by which we would define this as extended or not. If every implementation today can terminate, and I think we do actually have a fair number that are doing TLS route, then we may not make it extended. But it's easy to start things as extended and move them into, so it doesn't seem like a huge problem to do that.
I'm not sure I can think of, well, I'm not sure I know of any implementations that can do pass through and cannot terminate. But
Yeah, that's what I'm struggling with. I
Yeah.
can't think of
maybe they're
ones
out there.
that can't do them. They may be.
Candace, there is a case where you might want to do TLS routing based on SNI for HTTPS, and that would be the case where you're trying to canary an entire Ingress controller, for example. Or you are in the process of swapping to a separate cluster or something along those lines, where you may have things for various reasons set up to where your old version is going to get all the traffic, but you can look at the SNI and see that it's a subdomain and then route it over the new one. I have seen people do that. That's a case where an HTTP route could be kind of awkward and the TCP route or a TLS route can be really graceful.
Ricardo, actually, does anybody know how far along we got from the point where we put that in the memorandum versus like conformance tests or anything?
So all of these actually started because someone opened a PR asking for with a conformance test for TLS route termination.
Okay.
And I have challenged that because for me it was like, hey, we don't support that. And then Mike came and say like, yeah, we actually do support. There is this PR that changed this, you know. So
About a year ago,
I-
Mattia did a bunch of work to iron out kind of the use case and get updates.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's coming back to me now, actually.
Yeah, I think the fact that we don't have a gap for TLS route is actually what misses to glue all of those things of the decisions that were made on the
Yeah.
what we support versus what we have on the code, you know. But I kind of updated the gap to reflect what we already have on the code already. So this is sort of merged, and we have actually implementations willing to be conformant with that, you know. So that's I think where we got into the situation where like should we support that? Shouldn't we support that? And what is the difference between TCP and TLS route? Which I agree with Flynn. Like I guess it was Flynn or Mike that said, yeah, like the differentiation. It's like the SNI attribute being used to define which route should be taken, right? So we are not going through the layer 7. We are kind of stopping on the attributes of the layer 4, 5, I guess, on the SSL level.
At Linkerd, we've started talking about layer 5 because nobody else seems to be using layer 5. So
yeah, we can actually remove that.
Layer
IPv8, it's gonna,
TLS.
yeah.
layer TLS is probably more correct, even though it's more horrifying.
Okay. So, all right. So, yeah, I was aware that Ricardo was starting to push forward on this. I'm glad that we're talking about this. As far as the specific ask for like how we handle terminate, I think that would just as you're moving forward, Ricardo, like you said, we do have a conformance test that's trying to forward terminate
There-
right now. Is anybody reporting for that conformance test?
There is a PR for that.
Okay. there's
Sorry,
PR.
Kenneth and Mikai, they have the hands raised. So
So it hasn't
ahead.
emerged yet, so it's not in any conformance reports yet.
Go ahead, Candace.
So all of this stuff has just been coming together in the last couple of weeks as we're working on TLS route, I believe. It is in support of TLS route for sure, but it's not, like we had this conformance test for a year and people have been running it for a year. This is an open PR. One thing that I would like to see out of this, and I don't know why I'm such a stickler for process in this group, but I would like to see come out of this that we do not allow API changes in memorandums, that memorandums are to document things that are already in place and in ways that we all agree. But if we're adding something to an experimental feature, that is not necessarily that. I mean, that adding it to a memorandum doesn't mean that it's. I mean, this is a weird case because we don't have a gap for TLS route, but adding it
Which
first
is
to
itself a problem, right?
yeah, adding it to the memorandum just because we don't have a gap for the TLS route, it's adding something to a memorandum shouldn't automatically make it, experimental or standard. In my opinion, it's a memorandum still. It's not a experimental or standard. We shouldn't regard it as experimental or standard. And I think Micaiah was next. I don't know how
ahead,
people
Micaiah.
feel about that, adding.
I generally agree with that.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
Okay, thank you.
Memoranda should not.
Should be explanatory, not like introducing new features. Yeah.
Micaiah.
So I have a different perspective on this. I agree, a memorandum shouldn't add things, but here I feel like it's clarifying. And I'd like to check my mental model of Gateway API here, because the way I see it, these different route types, you have TLS, UDP, TCP, HTTP, gRPC, they're routing based on the incoming protocol. So TLS route says, I want to route incoming requests based on attributes of the TLS connection. And then over here, you have a gateway that says, when I have TLS, I'm going to pass it through or I'm going to terminate it. And those are separate concerns. They're orthogonal in my mind. So the fact that you have a TLS route that says route based on SNI, and the fact that you have a gateway that says terminate TLS or pass through TLS, it's just a natural consequence of those two facts that that TLS route allows you to either take TLS traffic and terminate it, or take TLS traffic and pass it through. So from that perspective, to me, the memorandum seems more like a clarification of something that is obvious to some people, surprising to other people, maybe inconsistently implemented. And that's the key point. When implementations don't all follow the same assumptions, that's when you need the clarification in the memorandum. But going back to my mental model, does that make sense that the X route only says for X protocol, this is how you route the traffic? And then the gateway, when it says terminate TLS, that's orthogonal. Is that a fair understanding of those concepts?
I think the important context here is that prior to this PR modifying the memorandum gap, this was explicitly not a supported combination.
That seems arbitrary, though. Like, why would you say it's not supported to use this feature that's defined standard on the gateway with this feature that's part of TLS route? Where does it come from that, wait, you can't actually have TLS and then terminate it on the gateway?
I mean, that was the impetus for this PR, adding what is effectively a new feature or new functionality for a combination that made sense, and explaining and justifying how that fits into the rest of it. Like that was why this PR was created.
I
But
think
prior to this, like, it was not something that was documented as supported behavior.
right. I think what Micaiah is getting at is, in this case, memorandum might have actually been maybe not perfect, but useful for the purpose of raising something up that was underspecified that was happening in the wild. I agree with that. Well, I also agree with memorandum is not a great place to add new specification. But I don't want to get in this case, which is I think the only case I've ever seen quite like this in our history, things actually kind of turned out okay. There may be some room to make an improvement to the process. Maybe we can put under memorandum, if you're bringing forward, I think it would be reasonable to take two actions here. One with a fork in the road. So the first action is, I think it would be reasonable to make a PR on memorandum, and we got to stop soon because we got a lot of agenda, that says, hey, if you're in the memorandum and you're trying to add some specification based on some underspecified thing, maybe that needs to actually be done through a GEP within itself, maybe something like that. We can tease through that asynchronously, like exactly how we want that to work. We don't want to over process it, but I think at least mentioning that is like something to think about. On the other hand, as far as the actual, like how things are getting developed forward with TLS route, this seems like good. We got a use case that was some implementations were doing this anyway. Now we have conformance. The results seem to be pretty good. I would say the only reason why we would, I would be more inclined to say it's extended, which was the first ask, if somebody could raise their hand and say, my implementation can't do it. Does that make sense? Go ahead, Rob. We probably do need to time check ourselves here and move async somewhere on this conversation, though, because we're almost at the half-hour point.
Yeah, I'll just say that, like, agree with what's already been said. This is a unique case. I'll comment as someone who created the original GEP, memorandum GEP, and also reviewed the PR that made this change. I think things worked as expected here, but you know, the original memorandum GEP had a pretty, you know, a larger scope than we've used before for memorandum, with actually the exception probably being policy attachment. But the idea was to put in one place, here's our vision for where TLS config could live in the future. Not necessarily that it will, you know, but here's all the places we could put it. Here's some consistent naming. Here's, you know, let's make sense at a very high level how this could fit. And in that context, I think this fits very well. What we probably should have done better is to describe this is something that we think we could allow in the future, and then have a more detailed GEP that went into how that would work. But I think that's the nuance here that was missed. But I do think this general pattern is useful. We just need to be very careful about the distinction between memorandum and a more detailed GEP.
Yeah, I think that makes sense.
Anytime you're holding up policy attachment as the other example of the way a given thing was done, that's possibly indicative of something on its own.
And with that, we'll move to the next topic on the agenda, I think. Unless Candice, do you have any? Do our actions and kind of follow ups there seem reasonable? Does this seem like a reasonable conclusion?
Yes. Are we going to hopefully not make API spec changes within memorandums going forward?
I think at the very least, if we want to put in a PR and asynchronously discuss, like a PR that suggests an update to the memorandum language that has some criteria for where that would not be appropriate, I think that is a reasonable conversation to have. I don't know.
I think I would like to, if we end up in a situation like this again, I'd like to make the distinction that memorandum GEPs describe what we can do, or what we think is in scope, whereas we would need a more detailed GEP to actually describe the API change.
Yeah, I think that sounds reasonable as well. So a little bit more async work to kind of come to a final conclusion, but I think the general idea of like a little bit more description of how that would work seems fine.
Thank you.
Snorwin. Yeah, thank you. Snorwin, go ahead.
I just want to raise attention on some peers I created around backend and frontend TLS. I made some suggestions of potential provisional gaps, and I'm looking for your feedback and thoughts. Try to pick up one. I think the first one is the most interesting one, because a lot of people were asking a way to skip TLS verification and still using TLS for connecting to backends. I tried to incorporate that into that GEP. So it would be interesting. I think Mike was also on the discussion of the original issue, and others as well. So looking for your inputs there. But just to raise attention for them, not something.
Yeah, roger that. That's always legit to just, it's very legit to raise attention for PRs on the meeting. So we've got 3 of them. Add provisional GEP for extending TLS validation in backend TLS policy. Certificate pinning for client certificate validation, and certificate revocation list for certificate validation. So if you're interested in any of these, I don't see any hands up, so I don't know if there's any immediate conversation, but if you're interested in these, please do subscribe to those PRs, check them out, add comments, review. Be very much appreciated.
Thanks.
I'll say props to Norwin for actually using the extended by field in the GEP YAML.
Yeah, nice.
Thanks to Ricardo reminding me constantly about it.
Nice.
All right, I don't see any hands up, so we'll continue. Mine is something similar. It's basically just, we've had this issue open for potential for firewall support for a while, like WAF, firewall, that kind of thing. It's there's been a lot of interest. So I moved forward with trying to get us into an initial provisional state to see if we can kind of build consensus on the what and why. So that's this PR right here, and would appreciate people taking a look and adding their comments if you're interested.
I would just want to comment on that. I haven't been paying a lot of attention. I know Shane originally sorry, Nick originally had voiced some concerns about including this in scope for Gateway API. And since he's out of office for a while, I would just be hesitant of moving this too far forward until he gets back.
Sure. Yeah, it doesn't have to. I'm not in a rush. My position was more interest had kind of bubbled up and more people had been kind of like talking about it. So at least getting us to that first step. However, this is, and Nick was right, and actually John pointed out put some comments on the PR already today. This is a potentially very hairy thing. I don't want to worry about the implementation details yet. And I am very happy to withdraw a PR if we get to a point where we realize that it just is too hairy to do it. But I think it's worth at least having it there for, if nothing else, withdrawn for the reasons why we withdrew it at some point so that people can come to it and say, well, they tried it. These are the reasons why they didn't want to move forward with it. And that's super clear. Bare minimum. At best, there may just be, I don't want to get into the details, but we may just need something light to support implementations that want to do this. And we may not need a very thick, like a thin wrapper or some very specific changes that would help support them. That might be worth it. So if you're generally interested in the area, but yeah, I hear you. And I'm not intending to try to like steamroll this one through or anything like that.
Shane, one question I have on that, on your comment, and I was a bit confused on your response to my PR, is why, I'm just curious, like why you feel that there might be something that is a lightweight shim to help users implement this, because from my perspective, that's what policy attachment is, and has already been used to solve these use cases effectively.
Invoking policy attachment basically goes straight into the how. So I don't really want to, but I think it may be, I am open to the suggestion that we do it as a memorandum, like it switches to a memorandum where policy attachment is what we decide is the way that people should do this. However, I will say that I have a personal bias that is very strong against that because I do not think that policy attachment is a particularly sound way to do things. So open to the suggestion that that's where we end up.
Yeah, okay, that's fair. I think I have a personal bias towards not being able to stop thinking about the how. So in my mind,
That's
the
okay.
how here is impossible, and which makes it very hard to
But do
talk
you
about
agree
the
that
PR.
do you agree that a future where we move to memorandum and say, if you want to do a firewall, we
Oh yeah, no,
suggest
that's
using
a
this
fine,
is a
that's a fine
potentially
outcome. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm open to that outcome. I don't love it, but I don't want to get caught up in that at the moment. What I really want is for implementations to have some kind of guidance, at bare minimum, some kind of guidance that suggests how that they can do this, because there's interest. You can see it from the issue that like lots of people, some people that don't usually show up at Gateway API, or at least aren't, I guess they're not the most active people, are like, yeah, I'm doing this. This sounds good. So at least trying to give them something to say why we are or are not doing this, or what way we're doing this because of these reasons, I think is worth following forward. Go ahead, Rob.
Yeah, I think I'm in a similar camp to John of just getting stuck on the how here, and I can't see a way that isn't just implementation specific. Good luck, basically. Like I don't see a ton of, maybe I'm just lacking creativity. And so what I would think is kind of like the bigger picture of, I think there's a broad category of potential extensions that fit in this category of, they probably don't fit in Gateway API. They're on the edges. They're going to be implementation specific extensions for the foreseeable future. Do we go through this process for each one of them, or is there kind of a more generic way to just say, these are the things that we think are unlikely to fit in Gateway API in the next, N years, and, therefore we recommend using X or Y pattern, where, my preference is also policy attachment, but I know not everyone shares that.
I think firewall is a highlight in terms of like, I get what you're saying. There's potentially a lot of different things that we could say, here's our memorandum for how you would do it. Maybe it's all policy attachment just for the sake of argument. And I think firewall actually stands out a little bit just because of the interest level, like the response level to the issue. So it might be worth specifically calling out. But bare minimum, with this and any other ones, having this is how we would generally advise people to do it, as opposed to right now. Like, I think somebody right now could very easily say, well, I don't really know which way to do it, and end up doing it via HTTP route filters in part or in whole versus policy attachment or some mixture of the two. And us having at least a little bit of an opinion on that and some guidance for them, I think is valuable, just as documentation even. Go ahead, Guy.
Thanks. It's been a while since we've been speaking about this particular proposal, so I think it's not a surprise to you and some people here that I'm obviously not against it as a concept. Quite the contrary, actually. At the same time, I do see Rob's and John's point here, and I wonder, even though you might have already stepped into the answering my next question, Shane, but I wonder if there's an opportunity here maybe to try to pick some of the capabilities under this that we've been calling a firewall feature, and try to build consensus on each one of those capabilities one by one, rather than tackling firewall as a whole? Or you think, Shane, that firewall justifies being a single thing, under a single feature name?
I think that my next agenda item actually speaks to your point.
I was just about to say, I think we're
So
edging into this next item.
we might as well just go into it. In the AI Gateway Working Group, we are talking, and Flynn and I created the first initial proposal, which we would love to have your feedback on, for payload processing. Again, we bring this here. This is not a Gateway API thing. Like, definitionally, it could lead to Gateway API changes, but just for the purposes of like how you should frame it when you go look at this, we're not proposing it as this has to happen in Gateway API at this phase. We're proposing this is actually something that's very important for AI. Currently, AI needs to be able to look at the body, to many of our dismays. But that is not unique to AI to have to look at the body, and actually ends up being something that firewalls and WAFs do. So payload processing, however it ends up working out in terms of how it is implemented or whatever, may be of interest and may be something that we kind of connect with the firewall effort. If we end up in a future where we add whatever support, just playing it forward, if Gateway API added better support for processing payloads, that is being able to do things with the body, even if that's just like a small change somewhere, and firewall can then utilize that, then that may be a reasonable thing to put in a memorandum. But yeah, I do think that firewall/WAF is a reasonably standout thing from my perspective, because for multiple customers over multiple, and when I say customers, I mean like at this current job and last job, this is something that keeps coming up over and over again. The user stories in there actually really resonate with me, because I hear them constantly about like, I am exposing this gateway to the internet. I want firewall. I want a WAF in front of that. I want to protect against the most common attacks. Like, this comes up a lot for me. So
I think Rob had his hand up next.
Cool. Yeah, I just, we can, I know we've already discussed this a bit, but I'm trying to understand how this is intended to interact with the thing that we already have in Gateway Inference Extension that does body-based processing. How do we, there's some proposals in that sub-project to, expand what it's capable of. I know, because AI Gateway is a working group, I'm assuming you would make proposals to some place, and since GIE already has something like this, would your proposals just be to augment what it already has, or
I think that's an
where do
open
you see this
question.
going?
I think that is an open question that is part of the proposal process to figure out. So if you would like, for anybody who's having that question and cares about that question, join us in the working group so we can figure that out.
I mean, what would the alternatives be? Would you compete? Would you create a competing
I mean, if you just want me to
standard,
ruminate
probably.
on ideas, like we could create a standard that then the GIE utilizes.
We could end up standardizing the way GIE currently does it.
Yeah,
I mean,
it's
I don't-
it's an open question.
Would that
Yeah.
standard be called policy attachment?
God, I hope not, but you never know.
No, but like in not being snarky here, I'm very curious about this concept of like making payload processing, which is purely an implementation detail users don't care about. And trust me, I know they don't care about it because I've tried to tell them about it, and they always give me a blank stare.
Sorry, which day is that, John?
I don't remember what did I say users maybe?
You just said you've tried to tell them about it and they
Oh
don't.
yes, users. Like it's a payload processing is not a feature. It's a implementation detail of a feature like rate limiting or like LM guardrails or something, right? So like I'm a bit hesitant to say that we build a foundation of payload processing that then you can build these higher level features on, because in my mind that's not the right abstraction to build APIs on, and we already have the right abstraction, which is policy attachment. And I am aware that there was comments about disagreeing and committing on policy attachment. It does not feel like we've done that as a community, which is why we keep
I'm sorry, it does not feel like we've done what as a community?
disagreeing and committing on policy attachment.
Do you have a solution for policy attachment right now that can work with an AI gateway set of features that can order the features so that you can
Yes.
do things like, okay, how do you do that? How do you order the
gateway-
features of policy
the
attachment
gateway
so that you
itself
get your
defines-
semantic router like before your semantic cache or after, etc.?
Yeah, the gateway itself. So we have all these features in our gateway with policy attachment today, pretty much. So this is not theoretical, but practical. So for the vast majority of our features, we define the ordering because there's really largely one ordering that makes sense, right? Like you're going to do JOT verification well before you do, I don't know, something else, right? There's generally a typical flow of like authentication, authorization, rate limiting, blah, 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 all these other things. For other specific things where you may want to do things in other orders, we have explicit fields in the policies that define the ordering semantics.
So what I'm hearing there is that you have extended policy attachments to do a thing that it doesn't currently do.
Well, no, policy attachment just means you can attach policies to the gateway. It doesn't say anything about ordering, right? We define
That's
the
my
ordering.
point.
Well, but there's no necessary need for a standard ordering because we can define it in our policies, right? It's not like I'm going to apply GKE guardrail policy and Red Hat WAF policy in one gateway, right? You're going to use this policies from one implementation.
It's an implementation detail of Agent Gateway's policies.
Yeah.
That's the phrasing I was looking for.
Yeah.
You're welcome to bring it up in the proposal in the working group. I don't know if the current proposal, being that we're just trying to establish that we agree on what we want, what the motivation is the right way. We might just have that conversation, but we can certainly add you as like a stakeholder and be like, hey, here's another PR, John, if you want to take a look as we move forward.
Where do you see, I know it's ahead of schedule, but I think John and I are both probably, skipping ahead and trying to think about what this would actually look like beyond the, who, what, why kind of thing. And that's where I would really like to make sure I'm, reviewing, commenting, etc. And right now, what's hard for me is I don't know where that will be, and so I don't know where to pay attention.
It kind of depends on what you want. So our intention with the current, you see proposals in there, it's very deliberately like this is a staging ground for proposals that would be disseminated into other areas, like SIG network, SIG multi-cluster, potentially SIG security. So you can pay attention to the proposals at this level and get involved. We would love to have you, like anybody in here. But I think there's an inclination that I'm trying to fight in pretty much every PR I have open currently, that because a PR was opened, if we allow it to merge at this early provisional state, that means it's going to production at some point. And personally, I don't take that opinion at all. I consider these conversational to a degree, and we're trying to be very deliberate about pulling in all the different perspectives. And then use that as the decision maker for whether this moves forward in a specific project or not. So if you want to be involved at that level, if you want to be involved at the, we're even just starting to formulate how this would even work at a basic level or why we would even care about it, join the working group. If you don't really want to have to spend time doing that, we will bring proposals probably to like Gateway API, GIE, things like that individually.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, as long as we know, as long as we have some kind of guarantee that things coming out of that working group will at least be raised in Gateway API, for example, when there's a proposal, like let's say that the proposal goes to GIE or some other sub-project, I don't know, as long as there's some kind of awareness here, because it feels like a lot of the things coming out of AI Gateway are going to be very relevant to this
Absolutely.
group.
That's why we put it in here, actually. I put it in here with this, knowing that it would draw fire, because the communication with everybody is such an important part of why we even did a working group. So yeah, we will try to keep up that communication as best as we can.
Cool.
I thought I saw another hand up, but I don't see it now.
There have been a couple of hands that went up and then came down.
Okay, I'll give a second.
I hope
And then
that's because we covered what they were going to ask as opposed to people giving up on being called on.
Yeah, I put my hand down because I don't really know where I was going with my comment, but I don't really see how payload processing fits into the Gateway API sort of API surface, because the
Not
API
100%
surface
sure
is,
it does, but
yeah.
it does have obviously the reason to bring it up here is because it could.
Right. And as a joke, I wrote, can we call it SOAP route? Because SOAP is the first protocol that I had contact with that required body processing, right? You couldn't route to the services without actually parsing the damn XML. So, and that's kind of how I think about it. It's like, okay, if we want to do MCP routing, like would we add an MCP route? Like where does this end, right? Maybe it would make sense to have something like an MCP route, but then again, if you also where does Gateway API's sort of functionality end? Because for me, Gateway API has mostly been about defining routes and load balancing, maybe, and then everything else, yeah, you can use policy attachment and other tools to do stuff, but it's not really included in Gateway API. But with the AI Gateway, obviously 90% of the functionality is not just about routing and load balancing. That's kind of covered by GIE. So yeah, I'm struggling to see how best to combine this. Should we like expand the scope of Gateway API to cover all these other things, or should we just focus on what's currently there, and that's routing and load balancing mostly, right?
I think the implication is for Gateway API, we may have something where we want to say Gateway API is actually lacking for the purposes of payload processing, as it were, and try to change something here, or it's not, and then that becomes again a way to just write this down. We have an opinion on how you do payload processing. It is policy attachment, for example. So I don't know that that's actually going to make sense for every implementation, and that's why we're doing the exercise. So believing in the exercise is a part of it, but yes, we will eventually have to make some decision. It does not have to be that the scope of Gateway API changes at all. But if it does, we're going to be extremely deliberate and communicative about why we think so. If you want to be a part of the process, the working group just started. Our next meeting is on Thursday, and we have a channel. I think it's either WG AI Gateway or AI Gateway WG on Kubernetes
It's
Slack.
the WGAI Gateway.
Thank you. Don't see any other hands up. So shall we move on? What we got left? We got 10 minutes. Okay. We actually did good. Flynn, do you want to share your screen or I'll just open this? Whoop.
Yeah, go ahead and share yours. It'll be, since you're already doing that. some of you, I think, well, many of you have already seen this as evinced by the comments. There are many comments, some of which I have resolved because they were fairly straightforward, some of which I have not resolved because they are less straightforward. I believe that I will be deleting the to be updated section because I believe that all of those are correctly updated at this point. But I feel like where we stand here is, first off, I would encourage everybody to read this because I do not think that I can try to summarize the entire thing in 10 minutes and still have any time for discussion. I believe, based on activity, that people are in fact embracing the, and I'm gonna have to do some background here. The section on the screen right now titled Provisional GEPs talks about a change from 1.4 to the next release with the idea of start by writing a provisional GEP and getting it merged as provisional, and then we will select things from the provisional GEPs to make it into experimental. Depending on how many provisional GEPs we end up with, we may just take all of them into experimental and ask people to work on them as long as sponsors for those things can be found. If not, we will do some voting to see which ones should be accepted. I do not currently know how many things we are going to have room to accept into experimental. I am hoping we will figure that out. Realistically, that's probably going to be figured out at KubeCon. Rob, was that something quick, or do you want to wait?
Yeah, I think in previous version, maybe with this doc, I don't know. We've been through a few, but one of the things we were trying to do was to actually raise the bar for what gets into experimental, so that anything that gets into experimental has a clear shot at getting to GA, and that means having.
That's in this doc about you need to have implementations signed up to actually do it if you get accepted into experimental.
So I think what that would mean is we wouldn't really have a limit. The limit would be how much are our implementations willing to sign up for, really. Like, I think the limit is more just mechanical of how much can you convince 3 or more gateway implementations that they're going to support in 6 months.
As a practical matter, I think I agree with you. Mostly I left language in there about we'll vote if we need to, just in case I don't know, maybe there's a ton of experimental things that are still pending at a given point, and we decide that we need that we can't actually take all that much on in a little, at a given release. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I think it was just, we understand there may not be enough pipeline. We may have to adjust our thinking.
Right. Yeah. Sorry, Rob, was that it from you just now?
Yeah, that was all.
I'm being very articulate this morning. Sorry about that, everyone. Candace, you were next.
Just a quick observation on the whole paper, the whole proposal, is that I feel like there's too many things that are changing with this release, and that we should probably introduce these changes maybe one by one. I don't know, but there are some major. I have some major issues with these, and I don't know if we're going to go through each of these changes, but I don't feel like this. I don't feel like our releases are so bad that they need to have these major changes made to them. I like the way that we were choosing which things that we were voting and choosing which things were being supported to move into standard or to move in or to start into experimental. I like the community aspect of it. And I feel like this is the changes that are being made here in those terms are I mean, they're not addressing any kind of problem that we have with it.
Let me finish summarizing what I think people seem to be on board with, and then we can circle back with that. And I'm kind of feeling like next time around, we are going to have to start with this one at the beginning of one of these meetings to make sure we have time. And generally, since this is one of those things that can soak up however much time we give it, I've not wanted to do that, but we're not going to get to the end of this today, certainly. Okay, so people do seem to be generally on board with the idea of writing out provisional GEPs, which is to say what, who, why GEPs before doing any other work. I like that because one of the things that we saw in previous release cycles was we would vote on an idea, accept it into experimental, and then there'd be a frantic scramble trying to write the GEP. And frantic scrambles are problematic. We have several people who are working on provisional GEPs right now. We have, I believe, some that have already been merged. I have not necessarily seen people going out and finding implementations who are willing to sponsor these GEPs. And that would be a good thing to see. I have heard some pushback about the idea of doing monthly experimental releases. I think that everything that I've heard has been addressed. I'm curious if anybody else disagrees with that in terms of the monthlies. In terms of those feedback items being addressed, everything that I have heard so far, I believe, is addressed by the idea that, yes, we should be able to automate the monthly releases, and yes, we will have validating admission policies that should protect against the things that people have been really worried about with monthlies. So I'm really curious to know if I'm reading that wrong or if other folks agree that that has been basically dealt with. And I'm happy to take feedback on, we can do that on Slack or whatever, but John just unmuted, so he's probably going to disagree.
I'm not necessarily disagreeing with you. I just more agreeing with Candace that I do feel like we have addressed, I mean, I have to double check, but I'd say many or probably all of the issues that were brought up with the proposal, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's worth the change. I personally don't suffer from any pains from Gateway API release. I understand why people do. So to me, if we just didn't do this, I would be happy. I might be happy if we do it as well, but I think I tend to view similar to Candace that maybe we are fixing something that's not broken. But I do understand that other people have different pains. So
even from my perspective, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I think that, yeah, there are reasons where we could keep on doing what we've already been doing. I have, a front row seat to the flaws, as someone who is largely responsible for what we've already been doing. I will be one of the first to criticize what we've already been doing. One of the flaws that has happened, is despite our best efforts, release timeline is unpredictable, right? We've gotten closer than probably we ever have with this release. We were maybe 2 weeks later than we thought, but still, that's suboptimal. And then two, what I've seen happen, and this is one of my bigger concerns, is that people are having to choose between, do I make changes to this GEP and, risk waiting another 6 months? It could go to GA in the next cycle, but I really should tweak this or that. And if I tweak this or that, that delays it by 6 months. And I don't know if my customer or whatever can wait, right? That's a very, very bad trade-off.
Yes.
Having these kind of more incremental releases that allow us to tinker with experimental things like this until we get them right seems highly valuable. And that is one of the things that I like most about this change. It is hard for me to think of a way to do this without the rest of the changes included in the doc, but if people have ideas for how we can do a subset of this and achieve similar results, I'm open. I recognize this is a pretty significant shift, but I do think there are significant benefits here.
So we are at time for this meeting. Let me do this. First off, Mike points out a problem where we have seen energetic contributors come in with PRs that we end up basically telling them no because of various reasons. And then we end up dropping things that we accepted earlier so that there's more energetic contributions don't come in. All of these things come back to the way I put it in the doc is that we get to choose between good, fast, and cheap. But as an open source project, we always have to choose cheap. And I would rather choose good than, I really want good, and separating out some of these time pressures seems really important. But we are at time. What I was going to say was I am delighted to see people doing provisional PRs. I believe that we can definitely do monthlies in a cheap way. I believe that we will be able to, in fact, get out a monthly in, October. But I'm going to move some of this discussion. I hate to say it, but I think I'm going to move it into a GitHub discussion or one or more so that we can continue this async before the next meeting.
Sounds good.
Shane, I assume you were raising your hand to say we're at time, people.
Yep, I was throwing up the clock. All right. So yes,
Yeah.
please follow up on the doc. And it sounds like Flynn's going to throw together a discussion. If you wouldn't mind
Yeah.
posting it in here somewhere,
To be-
Flynn, for people who are
I
interested.
will do that. To be clear, I am not at all opposed to rolling out things incrementally. I certainly have reasons for proposing everything in this document, even to the extent that some of them are things where, where maintainers made suggestions that made it into this document, which now has my name at the top of it. But yeah, incremental rollouts is not necessarily a bad thing.
Gotcha that.
So just figuring out a way to do it is the trick, right? All right.
All right. Thank
Thanks.
you, everyone.
And,
Until next time.
Yep. And Shane, either 1 week or 2 weeks from now, this is going to be at the front of the agenda, and we will have to time box it.
Roger that. Cheers, everybody.
Take care, y'all.